old guy. I'm busy. And so like, like the meeting people, like socializing sort of aspect is like it's not like when I was in my 20s where that just sort of happened. Um, so I think that's a part of it too. Um, yeah.
Totally. I always like to start things on an I'm an old guy note. Seems to be the way to go in life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um,
welcome. Thank you for joining, Jesse. Super psyched to have you. Really,
Thanks.
really dig your work, and I can't wait to kind of dive into the brain behind the work. Um,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny. There's this sort of like overwhelming motif of like, well, the pandemic didn't sort of socially affect comic book artists so much, living this
uh,
stuck in a room life.
yeah, I guess that's true. I feel like I wasn't really a comic book artist until the pandemic.
Right.
I had a day job until 2019. I mean, into 2020.
Mhm.
And then sort of, during the pandemic, I switched over to being a professional uh, comic book artist.
Yeah.
Um, so it was definitely, I taught ESL for a long time, and so it went from the situation of like going to work and talking and teaching and interacting with lots of people
Mhm.
kind of all day to just not not interacting at all.
Yeah.
um, and so it's definitely a change. Definitely some things where I wonder about my mental health of like the number of angry conversations I have in my head with people I don't know and we'll never meet. Like while I'm going through my day. Um,
It's interesting because I mean, I remember in the '90s remarking on, like, I would, like, be at my drawing table, and I go, "I don't think I've left my apartment in 3 days." Like, I would just kind of have these sort
yeah,
of mental, like, awakenings and go, "Maybe I should go outside," and, and the other thing was is that, like, I really think, like, social media, certainly like a Twitter is so like designed for people who are working at home, like, comic book creators. You just
mm,
can like always take this break, and there's going to be this body of people, to some degree or another
mhm,
out
mhm.
there to respond to whatever sort of like thing you've got clicking in your head.
Yeah, I don't really use social media that way.
Good.
I I don't really put what's in my head out, like out into the world in that sense
Yeah.
of like you know I don't. But I just feel like my thoughts really aren't worth that much a lot of the time. Like the things that I'll find myself thinking about, just like, who cares?
It's funny, nobody cares until somebody cares. That's the weirdest thing.
Right, yeah. And I guess it's like with all, when I have like a thought of something of like, are mustard and mayonnaise friends or enemies? Like, I don't actually want to have a conversation about that with anyone.
Right.
like, so I don't know why I had that thought, but I also don't want to talk about it. So I just sort of like post work related stuff, things like that. Maybe we'll talk about something sort of like creative. Um, but otherwise, I don't really engage.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing where I feel like a lot of my close friends are sort of the same way, and so it's like we're like tangentially in touch, which
Mhm.
sort of makes us almost not in touch because we don't get in touch for like the real conversation.
Yeah.
Because I sort of know what's going on. They sort of know what's going on with me, and so we don't have the like you know the real connection. We have this sort of light connection,
It's
which is unfortunate.
I know, that's like, I remember this must be like 6 or 7 years ago when I sort of got off of Facebook. I had just this sort of like finally aware of the fact that I was really unhappy, looking at Facebook. So I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I can't handle this anymore. So I contacted all the people who I like felt were like, okay, you are people of value in my life.
Mhm.
And I'm like, give me your email, give me your phone number, and let's carry on like as human beings. And if we want to talk, we can actually
Mhm.
talk in a meaningful fashion. And it's great in that respect because I don't look at like Instagram as like, oh, I'm gonna have a meaningful conversation from a
Right.
picture. Like it doesn't really function that way for me. But it was just kind of this interesting kind of moment. And I think that sort of forced sense of intention is really important,
Mhm.
in our fabric of of existence, like to just go like, oh yeah, whatever, cool, I know what that person's doing because they sent a picture of wherever they were on
Mhm.
some sort of platform, that I can kind of like keep this loose idea of who they are and what's going on.
Right, yeah. There's, like, the cadence of someone's voice, their rhythm, their sort of unguardedness,
Yeah,
that I feel comes from just, real conversation. Yeah, I feel we're doing the old guy thing really well right
I don't know
now.
if it's I don't know.
We're nailing
You know what?
it,
I don't know if it's an
like
old guy thing. I think it's just being aware of the things that we kinda need in life, and
yeah,
that might be that what old people need, but
maybe.
I suspect that everybody needs it. Everyone just finds it in a different fashion,
Mhm,
and I mean, I don't know, like, I keep hearing from people who have, like, younger kids, and those kids are kind of more directly connected versus being sort of letting a device be the complete connection.
mm,
So maybe it's just cyclical. I mean, if we were 15 years old and somebody handed us one of those boxes, we would be just the same, I think. You know?
maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
Um, I don't know, I feel like there's that what was that thing? It's like people born before the internet and people born after the internet are gonna be from different countries, and sort
No.
of like, sometimes I just feel like there's a way of interacting with technology and sending messages that just is it's kind of foreign to me, um, and so I just don't really do it that much,
Well,
and so while I think other people is sort of like living and breathing and communicating and like, the way they might speak in writing and short form writing that
mhm,
Twitter is or whatever, is much closer to the way they actually speak, while mine, I feel, is actually probably somewhat more distant.
yeah.
Um,
Do
but I
you
don't know.
I mean, do you feel I mean, because like you said you did, ESL,
Yeah.
for work. So, like, I mean, I mean, you're teaching, communication.
Mhm.
That's integral to your sort of who you are, on a
Right.
professional level. And, I mean, there's 2 sort of sides of the thing, like, how do you feel that that informs you as a storyteller and a creator in that respect? And the other half is, how do you feel that, before internet, after internet bifurcation affects, impacts storytelling in general? Because, I mean, we are looking at, because, I mean, you're probably old enough to remember the furor over MTV in the '80s, how, like, how can these kids understand these fast cuts, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, I don't know, that's a big question.
Yeah, they're yeah.
Um, that, like, I think in the first part, like, how did, um, teaching affect my storytelling? I'm not sure. I think maybe probably because, in general, I was, speaking with people whose whose skills weren't necessarily that developed. Sometimes they were nearly fluent, and other times not so much. Like the need for clarity and stuff, and so I think that's probably, and I don't know if that's storytelling, so much as communicating,
Mhm,
and so like that having things be clear and make sense, or deciding what needs to be clear, and
Yeah.
what's sort of irrelevant, and so like, I guess within teaching there'd be you can't teach all of it at once. And so it's like this can be confusing right now. Don't worry about it. Like, but this needs to be clear, and maybe sort of bringing that to how I think about communicating a story or something
Yeah.
is something that came from that, where it's like it's okay if this is unclear or doesn't make sense. Um, and maybe it'll never make sense, but that's all right because that's not the main focus. The main
Mhm.
focus is this thing over here. Um, in terms of how the internet's affected storytelling, I'm not sure. Um, that's too big for me, I
Well,
think.
yeah, I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I'm, sort of existentially, curious about like, what we're going to see from these things because I think we see it, in brief cuts and bits if we see things on the internet. Like I'll see, posts of joking things that are jokes, and I go, I don't understand the sort of the cadence of that joke. It doesn't have the same, like I don't have the cultural reference to it, so I go,
Mm,
okay, cool, but that type of stuff filters into media, and we'll end up seeing the way that these sort of, a TikTok version of a comic book will make its way because the storytelling needs might be different, for certain people as they grow into, the buying market,
mm,
and the creating market. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it'll be the lovely experiments that happen on the way to that. So,
yeah.
um, so linguistic understanding versus visual understanding, like these are two very different, they're two different sort of like sides of a same coin, but like how, like, I mean, like for someone like you're clearly gifted on the visual aspect of things. Were you always, like just constantly visualizing things, or was this something that was sort of like an aside to another version of you?
Um, I mean, I guess like I was one of those kids who could draw,
Yeah.
like and I feel like, when we were kids, everybody liked drawing. And then at some point, maybe around seventh, eighth grade, maybe earlier, it was like, no, some kids hate drawing now. And they're probably because there's just not that talent or affinity for it. And I'm
Mhm.
not talking like massive amounts of talent. I'm just like, some kids are, some people are coordinated and can
Right.
dance really well, like, and like are fine at a wedding, and other people are not like that level of talent. And so I guess I always had that. Um, but I feel like, and I feel like I have like some weird like visual like idiosyncrasies. But I feel like I question how much talent there was because it took so long for me to put the pieces together, um, that you know, I feel like with HEDRA, that's when people started noticing, and that's for me
Mhm.
sort of like I put a lot of pieces together, but it took a long time and some not necessarily that interesting comics uh, to get there, um, and to be able to like put the ideas together in ways, um, that could be understood or be noticed or uh, be understood what I was trying to do.
Right.
I feel that that took quite a while
Okay.
to get there,
Well,
and
you said the 7th or 8th grade thing, and, like, what that kinda says to me is, like, there's that thing about, like, that sort of positive feedback loop that,
mhm,
that sort of directs us
yeah,
early on in life, like, "Oh, this is a good drawing," or "Hey, that was a really good swing at the baseball bat," those kinds of things that kids go, "Oh, okay, I can kinda build on this." Like,
mhm.
do you recall any sort of, like, self-talk and awareness of that, like, when you were, younger in regards to your peers?
Um, I mean, yeah, I remember like being good at drawing and like,
Yeah.
like in like fourth grade, like, like people looking at my drawing and liking it,
Mhm.
or saying that's really good because I could, draw Garfield or whatever. Um, and so I guess there's that positive reinforcement. But I guess I also just feel like, people do have their sort of talents,
Yeah.
and some people are very good at putting other people at ease,
Mhm.
and I don't know where that comes from, nature, nurture, but I am not one of those people. Like, I
Is that why I'm so tense?
no, no, but like I find like I have a friend, one of my best friends, and he can say the things that will make people relax. He can say the things that, and like total strangers he's never met before.
Yeah.
It, it's just he has this ability, and like I can remember, like when I was teaching, the student like failed the class, and was getting like really upset about it, like, and my my natural response, our classes were a month long, was to be like, "Hey, look, you're just gonna have to take the class again. It's not a big deal. It's just a
Mhm.
month. In 100 years, you're gonna be dead. I'm gonna be dead. Nobody's gonna care about this." And that was the absolute wrong thing because he was just like, "Great. Thanks for reminding me I'm going to die."
Yeah.
Like, not only did I fail a class, death is looming. And I was like, "No, it's now I know that that's not what you should say to someone
Right.
when they're getting upset about failing a class, but, like, it's not something intrinsic. It's something I had to do wrong a couple times. And so, like, I just feel like that whatever drawing is, like, the ability to, like, put ideas into shapes and take the 3rd dimension and compress it to 2 dimensions, like, it's a little bit of a talent and then a lot of, like, practice,
Yeah,
um,
sure.
for it to work, I think.
Did now,
Um,
like, growing up, was it just you and the family? Like, were like, you,
yeah,
mom, dad, so it was a
I'm an
trio?
only child,
Yeah.
and I think it's kind of apparent.
Ah.
Uh, but yeah, it was just me. My parents divorced when I was pretty young,
Okay.
so like, yeah, plenty of time on my own, plenty of time in my head. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I grew up in rural Vermont, so um, you know, a lot of
Yeah.
quiet time. Um,
It's, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, it wasn't too rural where I grew up, but it was in New England, and it was, and all my siblings are all older, so I was basically an only kid, so there really
right.
was very little of there was nobody else,
Mhm.
in the house, so
Yeah.
it was just me kind of banging around and, hanging out in the woods,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Uh,
drawing and that kinda stuff, um, so, I mean, like, when you're go I mean, you said it took a long time to kinda put all those pieces together, like, can you track sort of like do you go like, "Oh, man, like, why did I not do this sooner? Why like, can you see this things that were, like, veering you away
mhm.
from it, or was there a point where you're like, "You know what? I really have always been interested in this. Let me go chase that." Like,
Um, I think there have been things that have, like, always, like, interested me about, comics and things that I've worked on, um, but there's sort of conflicting notions.
mm,
Um, like, I feel like within a comic book or a graphic novel or whatever you wanna call it, a piece of sequential art, like, there's sort of this kind of rule about how comics work of, like, your needs to sort of stay the same.
mm,
Like, you can't, like, I've been getting really, like, a little obsessed with stamps and, like, using stamps in my art and incorporating it as, like, a texture,
oh,
as,
cool.
like, a way of doing, like, backgrounds or something like that. But the book I'm working on, my personal book that I'm working on right now is, like, 200 it's gonna be, like, 250 pages or something, and I'm well past 200 pages, I
Mhm.
can't start putting stamping into the art now
Right.
because that's like, no, I've established 200 pages of how this looks, and
Yep.
so to make that change looks, and so like it would look wrong, it would draw attention to itself, which I feel like it shouldn't do. And so I think with that idea of like there needs to be this consistency of art, um, I think sometimes it almost encourages like the art shouldn't be noticed.
Mhm.
Um, like the art shouldn't draw attention to itself, but I don't really, so like there's this idea of like consistency, the art should be in the service of the narrative. But then there's also this idea of like, but I want people to notice what I'm doing, and I
Yeah.
want people to notice the way this page is organized, and I want people to notice the art, and like how to like put those ideas together, I think is something I still like struggle with. But like I think it was just sort of like I was doing things where I was like, oh, you shouldn't notice the art. The art should be in the service of the comic, whatever the comic is.
Right.
You know, I'm an indie comics person, so I shouldn't be, like, showing off, like, when I think of, like, well, no, but when I think of, like, whatever DC, Marvel, it's like
Yeah,
those
yeah,
guys are just, like, setting off fireworks all the
for
time,
sure.
like, and I'm putting out Belle and Sebastian, and it's gonna be nice and calm, and, like,
Yeah.
I don't want those fireworks, but, like but I do. Like,
Yeah.
and so it's like this balance and, like, back and forth between these 2 things that I think it just took me a while to navigate. And also, like, I feel there was this idea in my head of, like, what a graphic novel was, and I think a lot of people have ideas of what a graphic novel is, that I think maybe at one point was very meaningful to me, but by my mid 30s, I wasn't that interested in. And so, like getting rid of these old ideas and just sort of, I don't know, playing and, and having fun,
Mhm.
sort of like finding that balance because, like shooting off some fireworks, but also not just, doing it constantly.
It's interesting, I mean, yeah, I mean, listen, the '90s was the land of the fireworks when
Oh, yeah, yeah.
the air quote invention of the splash page comics came into play,
Hmm.
where it's like, "Hey, let's just do a splash page. Let's do a double," like, cool. But, like, I think that, like, it's funny because the artists who we love, regardless of whatever you love when it comes to, it we we go in forensically to the things that we love. If
Hmm.
you're a creator and you love something, you're gonna go look, listen, read, whatever it is, with a forensic eye, and you're gonna go and notice all the stuff, like all
Hmm.
of it, regardless of fireworks or not, like
Right.
because we're into that. So it's interesting because like I think when you consciously like say I'm going to blow it up and make this all this stuff happening, like that's sort of like playing to the to a bigger to the widest audience possible kind of approach versus that let the art service the story. And then because I think the fireworks happen in sort of like in those moments of servicing the story, and it can be
Hmm.
big as long as the story services it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to have fireworks,
Yeah.
and I think it is sort of like, yeah, using them with intention and not just sort of like every panel is like
remember,
100%.
remember Aeon
Um,
Flux, like
what?
Aeon Flux the cartoon.
Yeah, I saw a few episodes.
Like,
It's
it's
not.
the only thing I remember like, what I really remember was the fly landing, and
Mhm.
then the eyelashes closing, like, realizing
Right.
that the fly landed on, like, an eye, and it was just this close up thing, and, like, I felt like that was really strong, and it
Mhm.
wasn't this sort of huge epic thing, but it sort of said something, at that
Right,
moment,
right.
and it was very kind of like what you would call a quiet moment,
Mhm.
and I think that's kinda like to me, I love the quiet moments, like, as a writer or as a visual storyteller, like, those quiet moments are really exciting because you
Mhm.
really are you're working way harder, you know?
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
to make it as because it's your job to make it interesting. So
Mhm.
it becomes kind of fun to really go like, how do I entertain? How do I
Right.
build suspense or drama or whatever I need to do? Um, so okay, so do you, I guess going back to that question of like, how do you sort of navigated that, seventh grade kid who could draw really well to the point when you finally said like, good luck with learning English. I'm going to draw a comic book. Uh,
Um,
I know there's probably a few steps in between, but like, what was that navigation for you? Like, and what was your self-talk for that?
I mean, I always wanted to do comics.
Yeah.
Like from high school, um, I think I didn't really know how to do them.
Hmm.
Um, and and I feel like I had sort of I don't know, I guess like when I think of myself like when I first started being one, I'm always feel like I'm just beginning to be serious about doing comics. But when I first started begin to be serious, I felt like I looked at comics and thought of them more like music or something, and I wanted to like make a pop song or something like that. But I didn't really know how to do it, and I wasn't interested in aping somebody else
Hmm.
really. So it's just a lot of trial and error, and in the meantime, I needed to have a job.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah.
I was in the Peace Corps. I taught English in the Peace Corps, and when I came back, I got a job in ESL. And uh, during that time, I did two graphic novels that were published by NBM,
Hmm.
uh, and I drew HEDRA during that time as well, and it was just sort of like I go to work and then after I do whatever, and gradually it became more and more what I do is comics,
Yeah.
and so then the transition was like a couple of things of like one leaving Boston when I got married to be in Pennsylvania, and so like that teaching job didn't follow me.
Right.
And so I was doing curriculum, and then just things sort of worked out. The image deal came along, fortunately.
Hmm.
Um, you know, Hedra got noticed by people, so work started coming, and I don't know, I'm just
Well,
sort of right,
I'm gonna, no,
hoping it'll keep going.
I want to, yeah,
Um,
and I want to keep going on that too because I mean it's like I mean it's one of those sort of like going to the music metaphor. I mean your single hit, like it got in heavy rotation in that sense, and like so I mean let's just kind of like be big on that. Like what was that experience like for you? Because it's not like someone who hustles like to get a gig at Marvel and works on a book and then all of a sudden like that book gets big.
mhm,
I mean, it's not listen, you're drawing Fantastic Four or the X-Men or Spider-Man, like those books have been big before and they're
right,
always kind of big. So, but when you create something that's never been done before and people go like, oh, okay, cool. Like
yeah.
this is really unique and and I love it. Like the gratification's got to be great. But what is your like how does that like change your sort of like your your
Um,
planning and your thinking about yourself in the regard?
I think that's something I'm still working out,
Yeah.
but it's also like we were talking about the pandemic, it did happen in 2020, and
Hmm.
so, like, it's all of it felt like it seemed like it happened,
Hmm.
but there wasn't necessarily, like I didn't do any conventions, so I didn't see people face to face, it's just, like, through the internet, so, like, it's it's sort of hard to gauge what the reality is. Um, but I think, what what I feel has happened as a result for myself is just like my I got this support for doing something, and it's like, okay, so I can just keep doing that.
Mhm.
And like that this isn't that this like I don't know, I guess this boost in confidence of like I can just do things and they'll probably work out.
Yeah.
Like um and I don't know, I guess that would be the main thing. Um but some of it still like, like my day to day still remains like at home,
Yeah.
taking out the trash and all that stuff, and none of that has changed.
No, no, I mean,
Um,
yeah, sure, like, everyone has to
it's
put on
no one's gonna recognize me or anything like that.
that'll never happen in comics, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I know, and I'm about as nondescript as a person gets, so it's like, um, like I don't know. I guess mainly it's just sort of like maybe the sort of boost that I needed of like I'm okay at this, and I
Yeah.
can do this, and I can keep doing this.
Well, it's like I mean, it's like we were talking about earlier, that feedback loop,
Mhm. Yeah.
to kind of push someone else along, and I think, yeah, sure, you can I mean, you have a great feedback loop, like on Instagram, you know?
Mhm.
But there's also that's probably like, for me, there's this it's not there's a very weird feeling, from that because it's not it's different, and you question, for me, I question like, okay, what is the value of this? Like, what's going on here? Uh,
Yeah. I feel like with all, like, social media, it's like you can potentially get a lot of response to something, but, like, what is that response actually to? Is it something I want?
right. Yeah.
"Oh, a lot of people liked this, but do I actually like this?" Like, "This is just a one-off thing. Is this something I should pursue?"
Yeah.
There's all of that, and then I don't know. It's hard to navigate, I guess, but,
But so, I mean, like you said, I think if I'm, correct me if I'm misremembering, but like this was your first time tabling at New York Comic Con,
yeah,
correct?
yeah,
Right. So, I mean, I mean, like tabling at New York now is a big deal. Like it wasn't a big deal when I tabled in New York because it was the 90s, nobody cared.
right.
But like tabling now is not a small thing, especially at New York or San Diego.
Did not realize, how much it was gonna be.
Yeah. So
Uh,
like it's a huge thing. It's a very it's this, the second biggest stage, in the
mhm.
business. And you're not sitting there like you're sitting there with the thing that a lot of people know about. Like there's a bunch of people who, and
I mean, yes and
in
no.
context, let's say in context, not it's not Batman, it's
Like
cool.
some people know who I am and
Yeah.
some people don't.
Oh,
And it's not like I'm a superstar in any way. And so like with New York, I don't know how competitive it is to get in.
yeah.
Um, I don't know how competitive it was this year, whether it was less than before. Um, but it was my first time applying, and I got in. Um, and then it was pretty overwhelming for me. Not in any like I think no matter even if it had been a terrible show and nobody had bought anything, it would have been overwhelming just
Yeah.
because like it's so many people. It's it's so long, like in Artist Alley, and I was on my own, and so it's like 10 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like that's a really long day, and then like basically like afterwards, like get dinner, go to
Yeah.
bed, and like do it again.
Right.
And so it wasn't as social as I expected it to be. I thought I would have have time to go and meet and go and talk to people, but it was like,
Right.
"No, this is work." Like, this
Yeah.
is like working at a store or something.
Well, it's
Um,
funny because, like, the shows, like, so conventions, like, in the 90s were very much like networking things. Like,
mhm,
and I'm sure before that, obviously, but, like, it was all about, like, you went to the show, you had your table.
mhm,
There wasn't a whole lot of selling of things. You had artwork pages to sell if you were
right,
selling pages, but we didn't have stacks of comps. We didn't have a whole lot of, like, product on
right,
stage. We didn't have prints. We didn't have our own comic books because that market wasn't a really huge thing if you were in the
mhm,
mainstream. So it was a very different kind of world. So you would go and meet the artist that you wanted to go talk to.
right,
You built those sort of connections, reputations, and then you would hunt down editors and writers and have, try to really kind of work on what the next things could be. And the market has changed in that sense for the shows, and the shows are very much about these independent contractors who have their own
right.
companies at a table and selling
Guess so.
product. And
Right.
it's tough. And so, like, I mean, pro tip, bring someone who can sit at the table and do the work for you so you can go do something elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, I gotta find that person.
Yeah.
I don't know, who that would be, but
Yeah.
yeah, that was something.
And
Um,
or co-table. You
yeah,
find someone who you really get along with, and you can have a spread, and so it's like you guys can shift on and off and
mhm, yeah,
do that deal, because it is a grind. It is a
yeah,
grind.
yeah,
Um, I like I said, I went to Heroes, and I didn't table, and I have no reason really to table. So, like,
mhm,
but, like, I do miss tabling in the sense that I can sit down because
yeah, yeah,
standing
uh,
up all day is no fun.
yeah, and like at New York, there's sort of like waves of just like the crowd, and
Yeah.
there are moments where it's definitely nice just to like push my chair back and be like,
Mhm.
I'm just gonna sit and I'm gonna have a quiet moment, and disengage from this for a bit.
Were you doing any commission drawings, or did you just kind of
I did.
yeah,
I mean, I always draw on like books, um, and I did. I don't know, a few,
yeah,
but it was sort of I was selling prints, I was selling books, and so it took me a really really long time because I just couldn't get that like consistent time to work.
chunk of
Um,
time. Yeah,
yeah, that chunk of time to do drawing.
it's tough, and once again, that's the co-tabling person, like, when you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a person
Uh,
who's just handling all the sales, and, but it's like, it's also the other thing is, like, I had I we were traveling for the last couple of weeks, and I'm working in the middle of this big project, and I'm sitting in our car with my computer in my lap while we're driving around the country, and I don't see anything because my head's down,
right.
but
Yeah.
it's like that's kind of what it is at a convention if you're sitting and you're doing all the drawings.
Yeah, like there were, um, things I heard about afterwards. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't know about that."
Yeah.
Like, apparently, Peach Momoko, like, it was like swarmed,
Oh, yeah.
and it was sort of some sort of I don't know, but I was like, "Yeah, I wasn't aware of that." And it's sort of like you're not aware of I don't know, anything that's not going on in your row while
Sure.
you're in your row.
Yeah,
So
it's not a yeah, when it's busy, you can't see anything,
yeah,
so New York was in the Javits Center, but it wasn't what it is now. And I remember the first time I went to San Diego, and all my friends are like, "Oh, you're in for something big," because it was in the 90s and San Diego was huge.
yeah,
So it was this real sort of like, wow, there are a lot of people who come to comic conventions. Like, who knew,
yeah, yeah.
And then New York eventually blew up, and then, the sort of balance came out. What did you so I mean, one of the best parts about conventions is meeting people. Did you meet anybody that you have been like didn't know you would meet, or
Um, yeah, I mean, I met like I just I just sort of finished up my like main work, the drawing work on a book for IDW. So I got to meet the editors,
oh, cool.
who I'd never met. Um, and I met like a writer who'll probably be working with, but like in terms of being like a fan,
Yeah.
Um, I got to, like, briefly meet Daniel Warren Johnson,
Oh, cool.
but I was so tired. I really like, I was just, it was like the worst.
Yeah,
It's like it's like going up to, like, your favorite lead singer and being like, "I'm a big fan," and
I
that's
gotta
about
take a
all I
nap
got
now.
because my brain is completely fried.
Yeah.
So, like, I didn't meet him in any way that was, like, memorable
Right,
or
you weren't
something like
walking in
that.
with your morning cup of coffee, like, just ready for the day.
Yeah, no, 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 this was, like, 8 p.m. Saturday,
Right.
it was the 3rd day of it, I was totally worn out,
Oh,
like,
the yeah, they
brain
are
was
they're
not
enduring.
working at all,
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah. Yeah, I remember it was funny, I kicked myself 'cause I was standing at Heroes, and I was talking to someone else, and his table was right next there. I was talking to, Andrew, Headlopper Andrew,
McLean.
McLean,
Yeah,
and Daniel was sitting, like, there, and nobody was at his table. It was early in the morning, and I was like, "Oh,"
mhm,
but I was having a nice conversation with someone I know, so I wasn't
yeah,
gonna go, and then next thing I blinked, and then there was a huge sort of
right, yeah.
scrum. Um, yeah, also, I guess another thing was that I guess that was New York was right after, Kim Jong-gi.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
he was supposed to be there,
yeah, I think he was supposed to be going to the airport or something at the time,
yeah,
so, yeah,
that
just
was really, really sad to hear,
oh, yeah. I mean, I've that's the only place had seen the man, in
mhm.
person was at that show, and, it's our yeah, listen, we gotta take care of ourselves, like, these
Yeah,
things
yeah,
this is the kinda shit that we is easy to take care of if you do something about
I
it.
mean, I don't know the details,
Well,
but he
I
was
nor
young.
do I,
I
but
mean,
you
47, I
yeah,
think, or so, which is
young,
pretty young.
yeah.
Yeah, and, it's, I have gotten to the point where it's like, yeah, there has to be, like, a physical, like, I set alarms, to stretch,
Yeah,
stand up, and do, like, a weird little exercise routine, and even still, like, my left shoulder right now is hurting, my lower back is always ready to go, so it's
right.
like this effort to make the time to do these things,
It's it's so tough, like, it is so hard to schedule all these things that are as important as the other thing,
right,
know,
right,
into our days because, you know, if we don't, we're just gonna we're gonna be unhealthy or,
yeah,
bent over or whatever. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
it's
and definitely something for me that happened sort of during the pandemic, and then I guess, like, was just sort of like, comics had been my hobby,
mhm,
and then they became my job, and I was like, "What's my hobby?"
mm,
And, like, what's because, like, now it sort of feels like when e casual doodling is a little more difficult because is it casual, or am I working
right.
on something? Am I preparing something? Um, I mean, fortunately, I had a kid a year ago, and
Oh,
now that all
built-in
all
hobby.
concept of hobbies are out of my head. So it's like, "Oh, what do you have to do?" It's like everything I possibly could try and get done in the next 30 minutes before I think she
Right.
wakes up.
Well,
So,
yeah,
uh,
well, I mean, that it is yeah, I mean, I guess, listen, having a kid is a huge
yeah.
thing, and good for your brain because it takes you out of you know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
so you can't just be all me, you
Uh-huh.
have to be like, "Hey, kid." What I mean, so, like, you can hybridize this, it doesn't have to be just post-child, but, like, what's your day? Like, because I mean, like, are you
Um,
constantly modifying your day, or is your day just
um, right now, I'm in this run of conventions where it was SBX, New York, this weekend off, but then,
Baltimore?
MICE, which is the
Oh,
Massachusetts Independent Comics
Well, that's
Expo.
I hear that's a great show.
Yeah, it is. It was my hometown indie show
Right.
for years. I was at, like, the very first one. Yeah, it's a great show. Um, so that's in, like, I guess a week and a half now, and then after that, Baltimore.
Yep, which is a great
So
show too.
yeah, that's what I've heard. So, my schedule is getting, like, some severe rocking. Um, but, on a day-to-day basis, um, like, Mondays through Wednesdays, my wife works in the evenings, and so or afternoons, evenings. So I'm watching, uh, our daughter from about noon,
Mhm,
until she goes to bed at about 7. Um, and so on those days, I wake up at 5 a.m. and try and get as much done before noon.
mhm.
And then maybe during her nap, I'll do a little bit more. And then possibly in the evening, depending on how awake I am.
Right, what level of
Um,
exhaustion you
well,
are.
yeah, I'll try and do more. And then
Yeah,
Thursday and Friday are sort of my more free days, but also the days where I'm trying to do more. Um, Within that, and I try not to work on Saturday or Sunday. Um, and then within that schedule, um, basically every I start my day off with like 15-minute activities.
okay.
So like I have like little sketchbooks that I just make comic books up in, and that's like the first thing I do every day is just 15 minutes of just like drawing panels of stuff.
Okay.
And then I like try and like work on some watercolor, do some sketchbook, 15 minutes, like do
Mhm.
these like I don't know, this like work on commissions. Um, I'm doing a deck of tarot cards, so that gets in the 15 minutes. Uh, and then a page a day for whatever I'm working on,
Okay.
like contract work. Um, and then try and do 2 pages a week of my own book. And then whatever else comes up. And then Fridays are computer days where like cleaning up files, sending files, coloring things,
Yeah.
all the stuff that has to happen on a computer, I try and put off until Friday.
Oh,
Um,
that's pretty
Friday.
that seems that's good 'cause that kind of stuff can kinda get away with you, so if you happen to, like you don't wanna lose any of your sort of your analog time,
Right.
fiddling.
Yeah. No, I try. I'm pretty good at not. I don't really like working on a computer,
Yeah.
um, and so but it's something that needs to get done. So I just make one day sort of devoted to that.
How did how did you come to the model of the sort of those 15-minute incremental effort?
Um, I I I I don't know, but it seems like I need to be doing multiple things.
Okay.
I get so like this book I was working on for IDW is like 160 pages, and to just it's set in like a spaceship. It's but it's a reasonably realistic story, so no monsters, no beasts or anything like that really. Um, and so like to just be drawing spaceship interiors and people in those uniforms that I designed or whatever, like I, I also want to draw dinosaurs, and I also, I just
Mhm.
I get really frustrated by that sort of like being locked into something,
Well,
and
that
so the
makes
15
total
minutes is meant to just sort of like, no, you're going to practice some watercolor, you're going to practice, you're going to just sort of do your weird sketchbook themes, whatever that is, like people with hamburger heads.
right.
Um, and you're the little sketchbook with the comics is just sort of like stream of consciousness, like
Mhm.
just let weird stuff out, see what happens. Um, it's just sort of a way to make sure all that happens, so I don't get like too frustrated in
Yeah, because
working
'cause
on
otherwise
books.
You don't
Uh,
without that outlet, dude, you would be putting stamps in the middle of that long project because you're
right,
like,
yeah.
like I remember yeah, talking with Noah Vance Sciver about his book, and it's a long comic book that he
Mhm,
did um about Joseph Smith, and he was just, he's like, the hardest thing was just, I would get better. So I was like, 100 or so pages in, and I'm like, I got to go back and fix stuff on the earlier thing because,
mhm, mhm.
his technique improved. So he's
Right,
like, I just can't, it can't look completely off model. Like,
right, yeah.
but I think that's do you know The Artist's Way, the book, The Artist's Way?
No, I don't think so.
So one of the methodologies of that is you get up in the morning and you do what are called, what are they called, writers pages or something like that. Like, and you just sit down and you write 3 freehand pages, not
Mhm,
thinking. You just kind of blah, 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 blah. Sort of kind of that's kind of what you're doing, is you're doing that sort of
mhm.
thing with your small little sketchbook of comics. You're just like, I'm just going to let something happen, and who
Yeah.
cares?
Yeah, and it's I guess to me, it feels like an easy way to accomplish something. Like,
Right.
like other things might take more time, but like, and it's just 15 minutes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like
I
it's
mean, you're going
not
to be
like
dead in 100 years.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like but like it's I also feel like uh, me personally, like when I hear a lot of people talk about like writing or story or stuff, it feels very contorted and very contrived, and like there are all these rules and you got to do this and this and
Mhm.
this and this and this and I need to do this, and it's like things can just work out. Things
Yeah.
it's no guarantee. Like I just drew something and I wrote the end on it today, and I'm like, I don't think I'm ever gonna look at that again. But
Right.
like I think it's good for me to just sort of like loosen up because like you can just make up a story and it works out.
Yeah.
It comes out okay. Like, and I think it's good to be reminded of that. It's also that I have, you know, if someone asks me like, "Oh, do you have something for this?" I'm like, "Well,
Mhm.
let me look in this pile of like little sketchbooks and
No,
see
no,
if
your
there's something I can
archives.
adapt."
Gotta look in your
Um,
archives.
yeah, yeah. Um, and so yeah, it's just sort of like it's a way of like making sure I have the time, um, to do those things. Um, it sort of eases into like drawing a page
Mhm.
as well. It's like these. I used to think of it as like easy wins. Like it's like before you jump into something where it's gonna maybe challenge you artistically, or you're gonna have to like figure things out. It's like give yourself a little like warm up.
Yeah.
Um,
I was thinking like with basketball, like when, before the game, all the people are out there and they're throwing free throws.
right.
There's nobody standing there trying to block them. Like
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
building confidence and, in a very open space before
Mhm.
they have to have somebody sticking an elbow in their,
Right, yeah.
chest.
Uh,
No, that makes sense. So I mean, for your page work, this has been like this has been sort of like this bugbear I've been hunting within myself over a course of time, because in the racket, and you even said it yourself, get a page done, in the day, like, doing the racket was like, hey, get a page done a day and you can be a comic book artist, kid.
mhm.
And like, but they didn't say like, do it in a reasonable amount of time, don't spend 14 hours of your day drawing
Right,
a comic book page.
right.
So, spoiler alert, that's what I did. But but I'm fascinated with people who have defined, like, because the time between 5 a.m. and noon isn't 12 hours. So
Yeah. And
you
there's
get
breakfast in there as well, and,
right, right,
so, like,
exactly. Yeah,
there's
and
some
your
interruption.
funky stretching out
Yeah,
exercise.
yeah.
So like the key is like, so like, it's interesting how you designed your page execution to be able to fit within the time that you have available to do the work.
Mhm.
And I mean, how did you come to that? Like, because you didn't do that in
Uh,
2018 going like, well, I think this is what I'm doing, so I need to start, you know what I mean? You must have kind
yeah.
of evolved into this.
Um, I've always wanted to draw faster.
Okay.
Like,
Smart.
it's just something that, like, has been one of my, like, goals.
Okay. Yeah.
And I always feel like I'm drawing too slow, um, even though when it seems like compared to other people, I'm drawing actually pretty quickly. Um, I think, like, there's a lot of a lot of drawing is sort of, like, in your head, actually,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
and so I think, like, a certain amount of decisiveness actually just has, like, an effect on how fast you can draw something because,
Yeah.
like, like, there are some artists who clearly it had to take hours and hours and hours to do that, like Jeff Darrow or something like
Mhm.
that. Like, there's no way to do that quickly.
Right.
But a lot of artists I look at and it's like, yeah. I mean, if you make those decisions quick and put those lines down quick, it could be quick.
Yeah.
Um, and and then like, and I think as part of that decisiveness is like, what is for me at least, it's like, what should I spend time drawing? How should I spend time on it drawing?
Yeah.
Like those sorts of things. And also, I think because I had a day job for a long time and I was doing this after work, it's
Yep.
like you have I have a much I don't have 14 hours.
Right.
Like if I spend 14 hours on a page, I'm going to do a page a week. Like
Right.
and so like I feel there are things that I do that speed things up. Like my pencils are very minimal.
Mhm.
Um, my layouts are very minimal in a way. Um, and I do so a lot of the process is done in the inking, which I think is actually faster
Yeah.
than because I don't pencil that much. And
Right.
so like, like people if you spend for me, what it is that if I spend a lot of time penciling and get the penciling perfect, inking's only gonna take away from it
Yeah.
because it
No,
was
no, that
perfect.
makes
And
complete sense. Yeah.
so my penciling is often pretty much just the form and the shape, not a lot of detailed lines. If there's like a city in the background, I don't think I need to pencil that because no one's going to look that close.
Mhm.
So I can sort of just do it with a brush. Um, I think it's like those sorts of decisions um, and things that make it faster.
Yeah.
Um, and I do draw in like a semi simple style, I think. I feel um like there's a lot of detail in some ways and not a lot of detail in a lot of other ways.
I mean, listen, I don't think anybody is looking at like Mike Mignola and going like, I mean, seriously, dude, could you draw a few more lines? You know, I mean,
Right,
like
right, right, yeah.
we're all very much like, I think whatever anybody does with whatever if they do it with confidence,
Yeah,
it's great. You know, I don't, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm blanking on the composer, but there's this composer who's just very simple, like notes and lots of space in between the notes, but
right,
it's
yeah,
beautiful, or it can be, Mahler or Beethoven where it's just dense, and
right, yeah,
that's great too. Um, so I don't like, it's easy. Listen, it's easy to compare and say like, well, I don't put a lot of work, I don't put a lot of like lines or whatever in the thing, and like, and it's, but that's not always necessary,
yeah. No, I don't feel bad. I don't feel that I'm like cheating in any
Yeah.
way. It's just sort of, and I also like I've drawn a lot,
Mhm.
and I've sort of like, like figured out the way I draw and stuff, and so it gets like smoother, and then like there are some things that are just going to take a lot of time,
Yeah.
and that's the way it is. I don't finish that page that day,
Yeah.
so
So, like, I mean, like you were talking about how you structure things. Like, I mean, like, so HEDRA that's a pretty structured
right,
comic,
yeah,
like
yeah,
there is a mathematical, basis of this whole thing, and then
Right.
you tell a story within that sort of framework.
Uh-huh.
Was that part like, were you, like, saying, "Okay," was it an exercise? Was the story demanding that, or did you have this idea and say, "Can I create a story that fits within this?" Like, what was that genesis?
Yeah. I think I think with HEDRA and most of my own, like, sort of personal stuff, like, the design and structure of it is driving,
Mhm.
and the narrative conforms to that.
Okay.
And so I feel like with Hedra, like it was this, yeah, very mathematical, very like how does this get pieced together?
Mhm.
The Hedra, the name is 5 letters because there are 5 panels across, and I wanted 1 letter per
Right.
panel. Like it that's like a decision that I feel like if you say it to other people or people thinking about things, it's like, wait, your title is 5 letters because that's the structure of the page. That's really weird to think about something that way. That the panel width is what's defining your title,
Yeah.
but with that, it's like no, it has to. If it doesn't do that, what's the point?
Right.
It's like there's no words. It's not like I planned on there being no words. It's just like as it went along, if there is a word, what is that word? And how important does that word have to be?
Mhm.
Like, like if you have 30 pages of wordlessness, that first word, what could it possibly be to justify itself? And it's like
Right.
there are no words that justify itself. And that's also why I chose a title that nobody knows what it is.
Right.
Because if it's a word, if it was the word space, if it was the word like I don't know, flying, which is unfortunately in 6 letters, so it's unacceptable. But like those words are not strong enough for the design.
Mhm.
Like a word cannot do it. So it has to be a word that people don't really know,
Right.
but it's part of a word, it's a Latin base. And so like that's sort of like a guiding thought
Yeah.
for like how I put it together. Um, I think in terms of like my my thinking while I was doing it, it was just that like I had said, like I had these ideas of how what a graphic novel is, what an indie comic book artist is, and like like what genre indie comic books are doing. And I feel
Right.
that's changed a great deal from say like the early 2000s. But like I had sort of these internal editors, and I was like, "No, I'm not listening to them. I don't care. I'm gonna put 35 panels on a page because I like 35 panels on a page. I think it looks good. It feels good to me. Like I'm gonna get like obsessive about like how these panels go together because that's my mind, and
Mhm.
that's like how I look at things, and like I I it's just sort of like this idiosyncratic part of my brain, I think. Like if I look at a tile floor and I can't find a pattern in it, it's
Yeah.
infuriating.
Yeah, yeah, I know, I
Like
get
like
you.
like 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 like, I'm like, "Why isn't there order?"
Yep.
And it's like, there doesn't need to be. It's like, I know there doesn't need to be, but I really
Really want there to be
want
more.
it to be there. And
Yeah.
so, like that's clearly like my bog like, I was walking by, this house on our street, and they have it's Halloween, and they're getting set up, and they put like fake gravestones
Okay.
in there, and there's 4 people, and there's Jesse James, Jack the Ripper, Dracula, and Frankenstein, and it
Okay.
really bothers me because I'm like, no, 2 of those are real people. That
Right.
you you can't, and Dracula's undead.
Right.
I'm like, "You gotta have order. You have to have a system. If
Right,
you
right.
put these, they need to be all real people, or they should all be fictional people. You can't just mix and match." Like,
Sure.
um, and it's also like, we also don't know who Jack the Ripper was, and we know who Jesse James was.
Right, right, right.
Like these things, and sort of like, I feel like that's like my idiosyncratic thing that I like. I want there to be some sort of order and system, and so like with HEDRA, it's sort of like engaging in that, but then hopefully going beyond it and taking that system and start like playing with the way it's organized and like
Mm,
what can you use these rules to do and like what kind of things can happen within these rules
right.
um once like as the reader sort of progresses, it's like okay, they're learning the rules. Now let's start like bending these rules,
Mhm.
and their mind hopefully is like attuned to it after the first 15
Well,
pages or
it's like
so.
it's jazz, like jazz, like great jazz players, they're they're gonna play the melody. They're going to go through the whole thing and they're gonna establish what here's what the ground is.
Mhm.
Now we're going to now work within this framework and we're going to do things that you weren't expecting, but it's
Right.
always going to land back on the one, and it's going to
Yeah.
be the structure's there. We're not changing things. Like it's going to
Right.
be there, but you're going to hear it in a way that you didn't think you could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just it's just the way my brain
Yeah.
works, like using a grid, like I'll look at panels by like great artists who I respect a lot, and I'll see like their panel layout, and it will there's like I remember looking at like a John Bashima page from his Wolverine run,
Mhm.
and it's 9 panel page, and it's like it's almost a 9 panel grid, but it's not. It's like they're just off, and
Right.
it's like, why why
You're
aren't
like,
they all
why?
like they're so close to the same size.
Yeah.
They're close enough in size that's a negligible difference, and I'm like, then why?
Right.
Why
Yeah.
did you why is this wider than the other one just a little? It's like looking at a panel for me, and like if it looks if it's close to rectangular, but
Mhm.
close to square, it bothers me. I'm like, "No, it should be one or the other."
Right.
Like this is too close to a square, like, it's making me think about whether it's a square. It should be clearly a rectangle,
Right.
and, like, that that is I think, honestly, irrelevant, but it's like my
No.
mind will pick up on it very quickly and be
Yeah.
like, "Should be a square or shouldn't be a square."
Well, it's just
Um,
listen, it's one of the key things that made us, allowed us to survive, as a species. Our ability to recognize pattern is what
yeah.
has kept us alive in so many ways. Who are the artists that can recall that you like sort of stood out as people who handled really interesting, panel layouts? Like for
Mhm.
me, like the earliest that I remember would be someone like Howard Chaykin, who I was
Okay.
like, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And then like, and then a Frank Miller maybe, but like who are the people like and beyond? I mean,
Yeah.
let's toss
I
them
mean,
back and forth.
Chris Ware was,
Yeah,
like in
for
the
sure.
late '90s, like that first almost standard comic book size Acme Novelty Library.
Mhm.
It was like a really like a revelation of like how comics could work,
Yep.
um, and sort of that kind of like playing with it. Frank Miller, like Watchmen's kind of on that 16 panel
Yep.
grid, and he uses it. He goes back and forth. Watchmen actually has like I feel like more play than people think. Like like the scene of the comedian being thrown out the window at the very beginning.
Mhm.
Like it's on that 9 panel grid, but like three of like the going down the page, like three of the panels are actually the same image.
Right.
Like of him falling, it's actually the same drawing. It's the same perspective. So it's this one image, but because it's broken up and you don't notice it. So I feel like things like that were definitely one. I feel like after Chris Ware, there was a lot of indie artists doing like lots
Yeah.
of little panels. I feel I don't actually know Seth's early work, but definitely like later stuff. I felt like he was sort of getting into this sort of dense paneling, Ivan Brunetti
Mm.
as
Yeah.
well. Um, so I think those were like sort of big early ones.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember, like, what was it? Legion of Superheroes with Keith Giffen, when Keith
okay,
was just doing that 6-panel grid page after, I think it was 6 panels. Or was it 9 panels? Here I am now, I'm forgetting. Anyway,
I'm not
I
sure.
worked with Keith on a book, for Dark Horse, and that's how he wrote. He wrote on typing paper with a felt tip marker, and he would just kind of really loosely lay out the pages
Hmm.
in the panel grid and then hand them off to you. And he didn't care if you changed it, but that's how he was telling the story.
Right.
But it was super liberating, and it probably you felt it too. Like if you have the structure and here's this thing, you can kind of don't have to think as much in the
Hmm.
terms of like, okay, listen, I've got 6 panels here. I've got to fill this out. I got to do this way, or I have 35 panels. I've got to tell this
Right.
story in these 35 panels. And I think it's kind of there's a liberation in that because you can
Yeah.
go, all right, I don't have to come up with a new, this is 1/6 timing. I don't have to come up with
Right.
3/7 timing. Like I can
Uh,
keep this
yeah.
thing and tell a story in a rhythm.
Yeah. The page, like I think in using a grid is like the page is never blank. Like
Right.
it's like the first thing I do is start measuring everything out,
Mhm.
and it's like I've started like the process, and so there's this for me like I think because of the way my brain works, it's like there's also sort of to me six panel grid is not dense enough. There's
Right.
not enough like flexibility in it.
Mhm.
Um, but like going more dense, I think where it's like getting into like the 24, 25, 30,
Yep.
40, like it's getting to the stuff where it's like, okay, you're getting these relationships of size between the panels. And it's like, well, what panel is clearly a priority?
Right.
And that gets a like with it gridded out, there's a clear relationship
Yep.
between that one. Like these can be skinny little ones because they're not a priority. And like I find it sort of gives a structure that can be just sort of like utilized to make things easier and maybe quicker too.
Yeah. Have
Um,
you ever studied the grid system, I mean, in graphic design?
uh, not really. I think it came up in a graphic design book
Okay.
that
No,
I
because I mean,
started reading and didn't finish.
okay, no, no.
Um,
I mean, it's super like it's super relevant to what we're talking about. Um, like there's this great book called I'm going to call it the typographic grid rather than try to
okay,
speak the German. Um, and it's phenomenal. Like it breaks down the whole concept. But what we're talking about is that having that sort of that framework and structure does speed things up for you. You will be
right, yeah,
able to make your choices and solutions far quicker because you don't have to go, wait, where? Like you don't
yeah,
have to do that. That's the beauty of it.
right. And I feel and another thing that I'll look at will be like ratios.
Mhm.
And like I feel like within drawing, there's the idea of a tangent, and you really don't want that tangent.
Right.
Like the mind doesn't like it. But then I feel there's like a whole realm of like semi tangents.
Mm.
Um, like for me with word balloons in a panel, um, if it depends on the panel, but like oftentimes I want the relationship of like the text to the word balloon border to the panel border. I want there to be some relationship between
Mhm.
those two. So
Yeah.
if there's like two, I don't know, like a half inch between the word and the balloon edge,
Yep.
I want there also to be a half inch or a ratio of a half
Or a
inch.
ratio
Like
thereof. Yeah.
two is 1 inch is fine, but if it's like 3/8, like it's just
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
I
yeah.
want that sort of
Or
ratio
if
and
it's all
order.
that, but then there's like one over here which isn't that, you go, "Well, wait,
Right,
why?" Right.
right.
No, dude,
Like
you may have missed your calling as a graphic designer, I gotta say, because
maybe.
so funny. Like I remember my first exposure to something which I didn't understand, which were called ratios. So
uh,
what you would get, so like so I was an art director at L'Oreal at the time, and the brands that we were servicing were brands from Europe, and we would get the visuals, and we would have to develop, put these visuals into stores and into play around our country, and into these sort of structured environments. So the things are always the same
right,
shapes, but these graphics were always different. But they would
right,
develop ratios that if this thing is X wide, the distance between the bottom of that and the next thing below has to be
right, right.
32% of that X. And at first you're like, what is this gobbledygook that they're writing?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
then you go, oh, it all makes sense. And it's super, it's never wrong. It's
right,
always correct. And it feels right every single time because that ratio is consistent. The feelings are always there. And I think, you're right on, man. Like you need to talk to Tom Mueller.
okay,
So Tom does a lot of logo design and book
okay,
design for Marvel and other
okay.
publishers and Image and many others. And
Um,
great
yeah,
dude.
yeah, I probably would have benefited from that. I mean, one of the things I feel like I'm still, like, working on is, like, single images.
Mm.
Like, because they don't have panels, like, I'm like, where do I start with a single image? Like,
Dude, use
where
your use your grid.
I do. That's what I I that's what has started happening is like, no,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna grid it out. I'm gonna say
Yeah.
like, this is here. Even if there are no panels, like I still do it
It's
sort
page
of
layout. It
organized.
doesn't matter
Yeah.
if it's single image or if it's,
But
40.
it feels different.
Yeah.
To me. And so it's something like it's been like there's lots of things that I'm like consciously trying to get better at. But one is
Dude,
like single images
yeah.
is something I like try and get better at because I feel like and like like I feel like people are like oh layout guy like I think I'm definitely a layout guy to
Layout
people
guy.
and that's fine I'm totally cool with it like you've just heard me talk I obsess about it like but it's like yeah I would like to be able to like structure that strong image like and it's like there's some break in my brain where it's like when you switch from 2 images to 1, I'm like, "What
Mhm.
happened?" Like, I don't know where to begin. It's like I'm looking at that blank page
Right.
that is terrible because it's like, "Oh, no, there's no order, there's no, like, sequence," which isn't true. Like, it's there. I just
Yeah.
there's just some glitch in my
You know
brain.
what, dude? Come up with a grid and do a series of panda drawings, within and they're all in
Within
this
the
grid,
grid,
and you
yeah.
can have, like, the no visible grid, and then you can do the overlay of the grid to show, like, how
Right,
the
right,
pandas are within this grid.
yeah.
I think it would be an amazing exercise, and it would be an Etsy explosion for you. So,
Yeah,
win-win, right?
yeah,
Um,
um,
yeah, no, that's crazy. It's yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by it, and I think the more that people can have that conversation in this industry about
mhm,
these things that we're talking about here, I think the more that the industry benefits from it because
yeah,
often some people may not be exposed to this or aware of
mhm.
this. And if someone's like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't just some sort of highfalutin talk. This is actually kind of really interesting things that have meaning and they
Right.
do benefit. Like everything we look at that's produced,
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
grid.
I
There's a grid.
and I feel like everybody recognizes bad graphic design.
Oh, for sure.
They're like, "What?" Like, "I don't know what I'm looking at." Like, you just see it in the menu, you're like, "Well, I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
I
I'm not
can't
hungry.
engage in this." And I think it's hard within the industry of comics just because it's so broken up often,
Yeah.
where there's, and, this in the most of like corporate sense there's like the group of writers or whatever who come up with the main thing and then there's the writer on the specific thing
Mhm.
and then I don't know if that writer is thinking visually actually when they're writing. They might just be like, it's 6 panels per page, it's 5 panels. Like,
Right.
they just might have like a number in their head, but not
Mhm.
necessarily a visual. And then it goes to a penciler, and then it goes to an inker, and then it
Yep.
goes to a colorist, and then it goes to a letterer. Like, like all of those things, it gets harder and harder and harder because it's like, is is that penciler writing with that letterer in mind?
Mhm.
Like, um, so I
Well,
feel
you
like the
might be
more the more especially now where everyone's like, I haven't met the writer I'm working with now I've met, but otherwise I haven't met almost any of them.
yeah.
And so like to I think when you're in the same space, it's possible, but like separated as much as we are, I think it's very difficult to have that happen. And I think potentially, from a corporate sense, they might be like, within the comic, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Like,
Well,
it
I mean,
doesn't affect sales. Like,
oh,
I you know what I
I
mean?
mean, we're
Like,
like
I
you said,
not
man, we're
to
gonna be dead in 100 years, so what does it
no, but
matter?
like from a corporate sense, like, and I'm not saying anything bad about any Batman artist, Batman
No.
writer, but that title, Batman, does a lot of the work in selling that
It does
comic.
a
You know
yes,
what I
a
mean?
lot of heavy lifting
It does a
in that
lot of the
logo.
heavy lifting, and so
Yeah.
to some extent, what's in that comic, okay, so the graphic design isn't like, it's not as big a deal. Or Star Wars, like Star Wars does a
Sure.
lot of heavy lifting, you know, um, a famous person's name above something does a lot of the heavy lifting. And sort of like when you're using that sort of IP to drive sales,
Mhm.
it changes the focus, it changes the interest, and then you get, like an amazing artist who can draw like fireworks all the time, and maybe they're not interested in graphic design, but
Right.
they can draw,
Yeah,
like lights out. And it's like, well, they're drawing lights out. Who cares?
yeah,
Like if their graphic design isn't so great, like they're delivering every page like
yeah.
an amazing firework. And
Well,
so it's
well,
like this weird balance. And I
it
feel
is.
like
It is.
all of those things were going through my head, and now they've started to coalesce into
Yeah.
like a form where I'm like,
We get the thoughtful stuff. Like, I don't think we can always have thoughtful stuff, you know what I mean? Like,
right, no.
not everybody's album is the best album they've ever done.
I also don't wanna like, I like junk music sometimes. I
Sure.
like junk TV. I
Yep.
watch, like, 90 Day Fiancé. I don't think that much while I'm watching it,
Right. I wanna
like,
watch Harley
there's a
Davidson and
place for
Marlboro
everything. Yeah,
Man. Yeah.
and so, like, uh, but I just yeah,
No, no, dude, I totally get it. I mean, but the thing is like, there's an incremental thing that'll happen. I mean, like, listen, the work level now is so high. It's
oh,
so high,
it's amazing right now.
and that's not due to anything else but the fact that all this cumulative knowledge and technology slowly just raises and raises and raises the level. So you get a handful of people who are knocking things out of the park with using graphic design or different
Mhm.
techniques and different stuff. That stuff permeates, you know,
Yeah,
like Mike Mignola hitting, pumping the brakes and saying, "Hey, I'm gonna like just really get
yeah.
structured and designy on things." That affected a generation of
Oh,
artists,
yeah,
you
there's a
know?
lot of you can see him all over.
Everywhere, and God bless it. We need it,
Yeah,
you know, because
yeah,
it's all that kind of stuff just it just permeates. So be the layout guy, and there's gonna be someone else who's gonna be in,
yeah.
who's gonna be like, "I love the layout guy. I wanna do layout," and it's just a thing, man. It's just
Yeah.
a thing. It's cool. So what, like, before we end this whole thing, like, where can people like see what you got coming up, or when can people expect to see something, or what can they
Let's see.
go and find of yours?
Um, Finding stuff, I mean, you can find me online at Jesse Lonergan, anything.
It'll be in the description.
Yeah, all that stuff. I think books out right now. You can probably still get Planet Paradise from
Okay.
Image. You can get Ghosts of Science Past, which is a young adult science book that came out earlier this year. Next year, I think in the summer there'll be a book coming out from IDW with Van Jensen
Nice.
uh, called Arca, and then everything else I'm unsure
Yeah.
when it's coming
It's a
out.
little fuzzy.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm working right now. Actually, I'm working with Mike Mignola on a Hellboy universe
Oh,
comic.
sweet.
I think that will be coming out sometime next year, but
Nice.
I'm not sure when. Um, but yeah, so
That's
lots of things will be coming, I think.
that's great. I mean, it's so great to hear that, like, your sort of emotional, gamble, like you said, like, okay, well, I'm going to do this, has really paid off. But it seems to have paid off really with you doing the things that you want to do. It's
Yeah, I feel like I've gotten very, very lucky that I did this sort of, I don't know, weird little obsessive thing, but people seem to respond to it,
Mhm.
especially like comic book people.
Yeah.
I feel like I was at Heroes and this guy was like, "So are you like an artist only?" I'm like, and I was like, I don't know what that means really, but
That's great.
I think some non-artists like me, but like I feel like it got it got some of the right people's attention, and I've been very lucky, and also like been able to sort of like roll with it and be like, yeah, I also draw fast.
Which is huge.
Like I meet deadlines
Yeah.
and stuff. So like I think that's a good thing.
That's if there's yeah, I mean, listen, above all things, editors want, people the editors want someone who can hit the time.
Yeah,
That's like it really comes down to because nobody wants to sit there and stress out if the thing's going to happen. Like
yeah, yeah,
it's
uh
the worst feeling in the world, and it's a worst feeling to be the person who's not delivering on time. So it's
yeah, yeah.
do it. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, find Jesse online. Is your Instagram's great. It's you're just you know, and yeah, and he won't be, he won't make you crazy. He won't go like, I can't believe he said that.
No, no, probably not. So,
Well, thank you so much for taking the time.
oh, thanks.
I'm glad we were able to do this. It
It's
was just
been a
really
fun chat.
exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. Until next week, everyone. I don't know. Go make something. That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. We say go make something.